guys! So I know that with all of the Inktober videos I've been uploading this month, it's been a while since I've actually come on camera and shown my face. But since this video is not Inktober related, and it wouldn't ruin the consistency of it, I thought that I would do my intro this way. And in this video, I'm actually doing part 2 of a series that I started back in September. And back when I made that video, I claimed that it was going to be a 2-part series, and so here I am. And in the first part of this series, I opened a mixed media subscription box called the Bento box, and this was the autumn version. And I did that unboxing and just kind of showed off the supplies and gave some first impressions. And in this video, I'm actually going to be using those supplies. I'm working in a very free-flowing kind of way, the way that I approach most of my mixed media work. And it's actually the first time I've made an entire video dedicated to this style of my artwork. So I hope you guys enjoy, and let's get into it. So as I mentioned in the introduction to this video, this is part 2 of 2 of a little mini-series I'm doing featuring the Autumn 2018 Bento box. And in the first part of this little mini-series, I just did an unboxing. I opened the Bento box, I showed off all of the supplies that came inside of it, and I gave some first impressions, but I didn't actually use anything. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I actually used them and sort of experimented and incorporated them into my art journals. Now, this is kind of crazy to me because of how many videos are already on this channel. But this is actually the first time where you're going to get a full, proper look into my art journal process. I have shown little snippets before, specifically in art vlogs, where I incorporated little bits of footage of me working in my journals, but I've never dedicated an entire video to it. So this is going to be very interesting, and keeping it completely real, the word process makes it sound a lot more complicated than it actually is. In reality, I am very sporadic. I tend to jump between pages at the drop of a hat, and I will sometimes even flip between journals, especially if I'm trying to wait for a page to dry and I don't necessarily want to pull out a heat gun and worry about that. There's not a whole lot of organization to it. It doesn't really make sense to anyone but me, but this is the way that I've found allows me to most easily get caught up in the process and be less worried about the finished result. If I sit down in my journal and I say to myself that I want to complete a page, I want to take a blank sheet of paper and only work on that until it's complete, I will absolutely get perfectionistic about it. I've tried to do this before, it doesn't work for me. I will start to get precious about it, I won't want to take risks or try new things, I won't want to experiment, I will want to stick to things that I know work, and only things that work. However, when I use the process that I'm showing in this video, when I jump from project to project without any sort of rhyme or reason, it doesn't give me long enough to get concerned about that kind of thing. If I think that something might be interesting, I will do it without hesitation, because if I don't like the way it turns out, I can either cover it up or I can flip to another page and think about dealing with it later. Now, from personal experience, sometimes what will happen with this is I go into my art journal process with this concept in mind, the idea of jumping from page to page and journal to journal. But once I've sort of focused in on a page and I've added quite a bit to it, I might end up getting focused on it anyways and not wanting to leave it alone. However, because of the way I kind of eased myself into the process and the way that I was already telling myself that it's okay to make mistakes, it doesn't have the same negative effect. I can work on a page for an hour to an hour and a half in this way, and I won't get stuck, I won't be worried about it. And of course, I can always leave it if I do get stuck, but I tend to be a lot less worried about it overall. So if you are the type of person that is very similar to this, the kind of person who tends to get caught up in their own head and wants everything to be perfect, then this sort of process, this method of creating pages, might be something you could consider using or experimenting with. And speaking of experimenting, using new supplies in this way is always a lot of fun. There's a lot less pressure, especially with things that you don't quite know how to use. Instead of worrying about what you're supposed to be doing, you just try things and see what works. It is experimentation at its finest, at its most basic level, and to me, that's always a lot of fun. Now, speaking of the new supplies, I want to now move away from talk of my art journal process and talk about the art bento box specifically. The first thing I want to mention about the supplies that came in the box is that the acrylic, the Dick Blick brand matte acrylic craft paint, was very strange. When I was painting with it, it painted just fine. There wasn't really anything wrong with the paint. It dried matte the way it was supposed to, and it was easy to draw over the top of. But the texture of this paint was unlike anything I had ever seen, and it kind of weirded me out a little bit. Maybe it was the light yellow color of it, but the texture when it was squeezed onto a palette reminded me of scrambled eggs, and it really grossed me out, especially because I hate scrambled eggs, so that just made it even worse. And I don't know if it's just this specific bottle of paint that is like this, that is this texture, or if it's just all of the Blick brand matte acrylic. If you have this paint, this craft paint, and you've used it, let me know what the texture is like. Is the texture similar to other craft paints you have, or is it kind of gloppy and weird? I mean, when I put it down on the paper, it was fine, so I would probably still buy more, even with this weird texture, but it just kind of threw me for a loop. It was just so strange to look at. But I might have to buy some more of this acrylic paint and do a video experimenting with more colors of it, especially because it did dry matte, and I really like matte finish acrylic paints because I tend to draw over top of them. And with that small bit of criticism out of the way, and with that being said, one of my favorite pages I worked on during the length of this video was created using this paint. I was working on a page that I had already started a while back, specifically one where I had been experimenting with image transfers, even more specifically with magazine images. I was trying to see if it worked for someone who had asked that question, and it did work. I really enjoyed the effect of it. Also on this page, I had already glued down one of the spiderweb silhouettes from my Halloween line. I think it had just been sitting on my desk and I was trying to figure out where to put it, so I opened to a random page and just adhered it down, as that is how I tend to do it. So when I took this acrylic paint and painted the shape of a face over the page, that kind of showed through in the face, and I really liked the effect of that. If I didn't like that, I do think I probably could have added another layer over the top and covered it up, but because I liked the effect so much, I just kept it as is. And then I used the Pitt brand pastel pencil that also came in the Art Bento box to draw over top of that yellow and add in the facial features. The colors worked really well together, and the pencil drew over top of the paint perfectly. And ultimately, I created a face that I was very happy with. Also on this page, I used another little bit from the art bento box in the form of the tissue paper all of the things had been wrapped with. And I simply cut the shape of her shirt from that and glued that down. And another thing you will see me working on in this video is a page where I was trying to work with the Pitt Big Brush Pen. Now, for some reason, I thought the Pitt Artist Pens were water soluble. I don't know where I got that from. I have some of these pens, and I've never been able to dilute them with water before, but I suppose it had just been such a long time since I had used them properly that I didn't even think about it. And also, I had watered it down on a craft mat, and it had worked fine. So in my brain, it was water soluble, and it was not. So I basically had a very clunkily drawn figure that I had no idea what to do with. And I still haven't completed those pages, but I did add some layers over the top in the form of some hand-painted tissue paper to add some texture that eventually became a kind of shirt-like area of the page. And I added some line work and some details to her face to kind of reinforce those lines instead of the very clunky ones. Again, this is just how my process tends to work. I try not to worry too much about failure or messing up when I'm working in my art journals, because I feel like there's always something I can do or add to make myself like it eventually. I can also just turn the page and ignore it for a while. A lot of times, this is where my art journals vary from my illustration work. For those of you who have been watching my Inktober videos, or even just a few of them, or even know that I'm doing it, I talk a lot about how I tend to want my pieces to be good. And I think that's very natural. I think it's very human to want to like the things that you do. We don't want to look at the things that we create and think that they're bad. But I put a lot more pressure on myself with more finished illustrations than I do with actual mixed media art journals. And I'm trying to learn to apply this process of loose and experimental to my illustration work as well. I don't know that I will ever be in the same place with my illustration as I am with my art journals, just because in my brain they are two completely different things. With a mixed media journal, I can just paint over it if I don't like it, whereas with an ink illustration, if I dislike it, I have to start over, or I just have to learn to live with it. Ink is a lot more permanent, and when I'm doing a piece entirely in ink, you can't cover it up with something opaque unless you're trying to make it completely black. But even though I don't think I'll ever completely get to that point with my illustrations, I am trying, and that is what counts. So I hope you guys enjoyed this art journal time-lapse process, and that seeing how I create my pages and how loose I tend to be with them was inspiring or helpful to you. You can subscribe to see more videos like this or very different from this in the future. Currently, I'm in the middle of a daily Inktober project where I am trying to create videos for every day of Inktober. So be sure to check that out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.